Hello everyone and welcome to Afrolit Part 2 with me, Mona Eltahawy. And as always, I begin with my declaration of faith, fuck the patriarchy. Before I begin my reading, I want to send love and solidarity to you all, wherever you are. I hope that you are well and safe. I hope you and your loved ones are well and safe. And I send you my love and solidarity. Today, I will be reading from my second book, The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. Hold on one second. I want to make sure that everything is okay. Is everything okay? Can everybody hear me? Hello, everyone.
Takes a minute.
It is live. Everything is fine. Can we wait for a few more minutes? Yes, we can definitely wait for a few more minutes. Is everything okay?
I don't see you.
I'm on Afrolit on Frontières.
Oh, I thought you were on Eltahawy.
No. Okay, while I'm waiting for you all to join, again, I repeat my wishes that you are all doing well. Whichever country you're in, I hope that you have all that you need. I hope that you are safe. I hope you are healthy. I hope you are well. For those of you who are observing Ramadan, I hope it is an easy fast. For those of you who are not observing Ramadan, I hope it is an easy month. And I send love and solidarity to everyone. And I'm returning all the waves that everyone is sending me. I miss the readings with everyone. I miss being in a room full of people where I can begin and end everything with fuck the patriarchy. I miss that interaction between us, but we will get there. Let's survive this. Let's merge through this. Let's not talk about going back to normal because there is no going back. And the normal is the shit and the fuckery that brought us here. So no going back. We are moving forward to a better world. So, hello everybody. I won't be able to stop and say hello to everyone because I have really bad eyesight. And I will be reading very soon. So, I will wait for another 5 minutes or so and I will just continue to chat with you until I see the room fill up with more people. And in the chats, in the waves that you're all sending me, tell me how you're doing. Tell me that you're okay. I hope books are your beloved companions during these difficult days. And I'm actually going to read to you from a chapter in this book, The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls, that has been the most controversial, as if there is anything that I do that isn't controversial. But let me tell you about the 7 necessary sins before I do begin reading. The 7 sins, and obviously they're not sins. These are attributes that women and girls are not supposed to want to be or to do or to behave in these ways. And these so-called sins are anger, attention, profanity, ambition, power, violence, and lust. Now, obviously, I'm riffing off the 7 deadly sins, but I'm calling these necessary sins because I consider them attributes that we need to fuck up the patriarchy. And because patriarchy understands that these are attributes that will fuck it up, they discourage these attributes, the sins, in women and girls. Now, what do I mean when I talk about patriarchy? I want to be very clear what I talk about when I say patriarchy. I'm not talking about men, and I'm not talking just about sexism, which is discrimination based on sex, and I'm not just talking about misogyny, which is the hatred of women. When I talk about patriarchy, I want you to imagine an octopus. The head of the octopus is patriarchy, because patriarchy, I believe, is universal. It exists everywhere. It exists in Egypt, my country of birth. It exists in the United States, my country of naturalization. I'm an Egyptian American citizen. It exists everywhere. So the head of the octopus is patriarchy. And each one of the tentacles is an oppression, because patriarchy is a system of oppressions that privileges male dominance. What do I mean by system of oppressions? I mean those tentacles that the octopus called patriarchy uses to basically suffocate us for the sake of the domination or the dominance of men. When I say oppressions, what do I mean? Each one of those tentacles is obviously going to be different according to where you live, but they all serve the head of the octopus patriarchy. So in the United States, for example, one tentacle would be white supremacy. In another country, it would be racism of another form, of whatever the dominant group is. Another tentacle would be capitalism and classism. Another tentacle would be misogyny. Another tentacle is homophobia. Another is transphobia. Another is bigotry based on religion. Another is ableism, a form of discrimination and bigotry according to the different abilities that your bodies have. Another tentacle would be ageism, and by ageism, not just discrimination against older people, but discrimination against younger people. So you get what I'm talking about. Patriarchy is the octopus. It uses the tentacles. Each one is a form of oppression, and all of this is for the sake of male dominance. Not all men benefit from patriarchy, and this is something I stress again and again in my book. And it's not just women and girls who are hurt by patriarchy, because again, in my book, I talk about women, girls, queer people, non-binary people, people who are oppressed by patriarchy. So men, cisgender men now, who are not rich, who are not wealthy, who do not belong to the dominant group. Because the men who truly benefit from patriarchy, depending on where you live, are by and large wealthy, able-bodied, conservative men who follow the orthodox version of the religion of that country. So, having established the octopus called patriarchy, I am now going to start reading from my book. After I read, Natasha will join us, the Zambian author, and she will be the moderator and who will discuss the issues with me and will very kindly and generously convey your questions to me. So think of questions to ask me as I'm reading for you, okay? So here we go. This is from, like I said, the controversial chapter in my book. Its title is Violence. It's the sin of violence. And I begin each chapter with an epigraph from one of my favorite authors or singers. So like the sin profanity, or the chapter on profanity, for example, begins with a quote from Cardi B. This chapter on the sin of violence begins with a quote from the lesbian black playwright Lorraine Hansberry. Obviously, the most oppressed of any oppressed group will be its women. Obviously, since women, period, are oppressed in society, and if you've got an oppressed group, they, women, are twice oppressed. So I should imagine that they react accordingly. As oppression makes people more militant, then women would be twice militant because they're twice oppressed. Lorraine Hansberry, who sadly is no longer with us, said this in May 12th, 1959, in an interview with the American journalist and writer Studs Terkel. Now I'm quoting myself. Imagine if we declared war. Imagine if we fuck this shit snapped en masse and systematically killed men for no reason at all other than for being men. Imagine this culling starting in one country with 5 men a week. Then each week, this imaginary scenario would add more countries and kill more men in each of them. 50 a week, then 100 men, then 500. Imagine an underground movement called Fuck the Patriarchy, FTP, which would claim responsibility and warn that it was putting the world on notice that it would keep killing more and more men until the patriarchy sent a representative to talk. We do not want money, FTP would say. We do not want a new president or a new prime minister to replace the current one, this imaginary claim of responsibility would say. We do not want a few more seats in Parliament. We do not want a pay raise. We do not want men to promise to do the laundry or to promise to babysit their own children. We do not want a few more crumbs. So, patriarchy, send your representative. I can imagine the infighting that this claim of responsibility would cause. So, patriarchy, send your representative. The ultimatum: begin dismantling patriarchy or we will continue killing more and more men every week. How many men do you think must be killed before patriarchy begins to be dismantled? 1,000? 10,000? 1 million? Is it barbaric to ask this? Is it savage? Many millions of men have already been killed in wars begun by men against other men. Imagine this, our declaration of war against patriarchy. How long would it take for the world to pay attention to the killings of men? When would it become a global emergency? A month? 5 months? How many men would have to be killed for absolutely no reason whatsoever other than they were men for the world to wonder, what the fuck is going on? Who is behind this madness? Who do we talk to so that this savagery can stop? Who do we invade? Who should we bomb? What did men ever do to deserve this barbarity? Imagine. How many men would have to be killed before the representatives of patriarchy called an emergency summit to bring to a halt the senseless murders of their own? How many men must we kill until we get patriarchy to sit around that table and negotiate? How would men feel when they saw so many of their fellow men murdered simply for being like them, men? Would they change their behavior? Would they walk together for safety, avoid certain areas of town, make sure they were not out beyond a certain time? How would boys feel knowing that their gender made them walking targets? How would it make their parents feel? Would it change the way they raised or treated their sons? Would it change the way boys behaved? I know that this is an intentionally disturbing scenario. I intended this disturbance. But we are long overdue a fuck this shit snapping. It's as if men have hoarded the operating manual for violence, and from boyhood have been taught the language of that manual, while girls and women are kept illiterate. Violence, daily acts of violence against women simply for being women, benefits men. Patriarchy's copyright over violence has terrorized us into fear and submission. If every act of violence against women were reported on the news, every act, it would be recognized for the epidemic. Hear that word? Epidemic. It would be recognized for the war that it is. Now, this is actually why I'm reading you this chapter, because we are in an epidemic right now, but before this current COVID-19 epidemic, there was a global epidemic that has always existed and will continue to exist after COVID-19 has been vaccinated away. And that's why I'm reading you this chapter. So, instead, only especially violent attacks are reported, and not even all of those, which tells you that society does not care and or is immune to them. One more time, for emphasis. If every act of violence against women were reported on the news, it would be recognized for the epidemic, for the war that it is. Instead, only especially violent attacks are reported, and not even all of those, which tells you that society does not care and or is immune to them. A daily war is carried out against women, and yet it is not called barbaric and it is not called savage. We're supposed to learn to live with it, to accommodate it, but never to fight it. Well, enough. Why shouldn't we declare war? Feminism is the F word some hesitate to use. But the word I rarely use is the T word, T for terrorism. Because I recognize the ways that the word terrorism is used to distinguish the violence committed by enemies from the violence committed by allies. But if terrorism means violence meant to scare us into changing the way we behave, then surely cutting off healthy parts of a girl's genitals to ensure her chastity, otherwise known as female genital mutilation or cutting, or sexually harassing girls and women on the street to maintain male primacy over public spaces, and the startling figure of some 3 women killed every day, 3 women are killed in the United States by a current or a former partner. All of these is a form of terrorism. Add social acceptance on top of the terrorism inflicted on girls and women, and ask yourself again why the stories of violence against women rarely make the headlines. Why don't those violations committed against girls and women disturb us as much as the stories of explosions and torture? I am not making light of armed militancy nor of the horrors of torture or police brutality. But by ignoring the hideous violations of women's rights, the daily drip, 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 drip of misogyny, we make light of the crimes committed against girls and women. When acts of militant violence claim the lives of senior politicians, security chiefs are at times fired for failing to do their jobs. Who do we fire for the abject failure of stemming the terrorism that women and girls, cis and transgender, are subjected to? Who do we fire? Who do we sack? Girls and women, half of our society, are always told to wait. Wait until elections are held. Wait until political prisoners are released. Wait until we end torture. Wait until we end police brutality. Wait, wait, wait. The leitmotif of women's stories and our lives is waiting. When will the stories of girls and women be elevated and given as much prominence and priority as those about explosions, torture, and cabinet reshuffles? Unless we impose on societal consciousness just how rife violence against women is and how it's ordinary men who commit it, not psychopaths, ordinary men. Unless we do all of that, it will continue to benefit ordinary men. Denial of that enables men to distance themselves from the violence. Whether any individual man has ever beaten up or raped a woman is besides the point. Because such violence, which is enabled and protected by patriarchy, helps maintain a social construct that privileges all men. They are beneficiaries of that violence because that violence upholds patriarchy, and it's the foundation. That violence is the foundation of patriarchy. Women's violence is considered acceptable only when it furthers the cause of patriarchy. The nurturing and motherly attributes that women are burdened with are essentially propaganda wrought by the patriarchy to keep things exactly as they are. When women rule in the name of patriarchy, remember British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher? No feminist. When women rule in the name of patriarchy, they're allowed to forego nurturing and motherly reductionism, and they're allowed to launch wars and pass into effect policy that benefits patriarchy. Countries boast when women begin serving in combat roles in their armed forces. They proudly announce when a woman makes it to a senior position in the military, leading divisions and large numbers of troops. But the wars that female combatants will fight are done so in the name of patriarchy. They promote a violence that only the patriarchal state claims a right to. It is time for women to claim that same right to launch wars, not between countries, but against patriarchy. Not only are women socialized into submission, but we're told, essentially, not to be violent even as a form of self-defense, but to wait until men can stop being violent towards us. When that would happen exactly is unclear and quite unrealistic, seeing as patriarchy has been using violence to keep us in line for centuries. We are told again and again that it's in men's nature to be violent. Surely that should disturb and make those men who refuse violence understand that patriarchal constructs of masculinity confine them too. Patriarchy is bad for you too, guys. We are told that women are weak, passive, emotional, submissive, etc. Which women are those things and which women are excluded from those stereotypes? It matters because race, class, and gender all impact the ways that women's violence is punished. We have been socialized into acquiescence, ostensibly for our own good. So again, how many men would need to be killed in that imaginary scenario for patriarchy to take us seriously? And for how long would we have to wage battle before patriarchy begins to be dismantled? Are my questions absurd? Yes, deliberately so. But we all must ask the absurd questions to fully take in the scale of violence that women consistently endure. How many women must be killed, raped, beaten, and emotionally abused until we do? And is self-defense the only form of violence allowed to women, if at all? These are disturbing questions. I know. I stand in the disturbance and the discomfort caused by the questions I've posed. I insist you do too, because women, girls, and non-binary and queer people face more than disturbance and discomfort. They are dying, and patriarchy shows little concern. Consider that many liberation movements, from the anti-colonial to the anti-occupation, have used violence as a means to overturn systems of oppression and injustice. People have a right to resist. But which people? It's usually groups and movements led by men, and including a few women whose roles are too often erased and conveniently forgotten after the revolution or liberation has succeeded, lest women remember that they too can use violence. We can't have women thinking that they too know how to use weapons against oppressors. They might turn those weapons used against the foreign occupiers against, instead, their local patriarchal occupiers. And that's how we must consider patriarchy. Patriarchy is a form of occupation, is an oppressive force against which we have a right to use force to liberate ourselves. Is there an older form of occupation than patriarchy? If violence is the language that patriarchy understands, isn't it time for women to speak that language too, if only for our own safety? Thank you. That was from the chapter on violence. And now I will wait for Natasha to jump on, to join me, so that I can take your questions. Hello, Natasha. I'm waiting for you. Hope everyone is still hanging in there. Hope I fired you up, provoked you, and instigated you. All right, I'm checking. Here we go. View. There she is. All right, go live. Waiting. Let me fix my hair. You see my roots? All this is going to be cut off soon. Natasha! Hello!
Hi. Hi, Mona.
How are you?
Fuck the patriarchy. I'm
Fuck
good.
the patriarchy, sister!
How are you?
I'm good. I'm here. I'm determined to yell fuck the patriarchy every day. I was just telling everyone I'm going to cut all of this off very soon for the bus cut of the pandemic because my roots are coming in. I will look even fiercer.
Yeah, but well, they look great anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, wow. I feel extremely uncomfortable after that reading.
Yes.
My mind feels really stretched in just a few minutes.
Yes.
And it's timely. I mean, unfortunately in my neighborhood just yesterday, there's a story that's, set, everyone's so upset. A young lady at 16 years old was found chopped up in a body bag. And they found the guy, he's a 32-year-old. So I think it really drives home because this is not an exaggeration. It's not inflammatory. It is what happens every day. So I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a war that has been waged against us since forever. And shall I call you Natasha or Tasha? What would you prefer?
Call me Tash.
Tash.
Whatever you want. Whatever's
Tash,
nice.
Thank you. No, Tash, thank you. Tash, when COVID-19 began to be the global headline that it is now and it kept so many of us at home, everyone's talking about the global pandemic. Well, there's been a global pandemic for centuries. And it's the global pandemic that kills women, girls, children, queer and non-binary people. But it's the pandemic that we choose to forget. And this terrible story in your neighborhood, even in the middle of a fucking pandemic, men are still out there killing us. Are like, what the fuck? There's a virus outside and there's a terrorist inside in our own homes,
Yeah. No, it's terrible. And like you said, it's not, it's not recent. It is what it is. And we no one's done anything about it. So I've got lots of comments. I think there's the first question that came from Maza here. And she asks you, she says, you center Black women and women of color in your books. When did it strike you that their work was central to constructing a new world?
Thank you for that question. And I'm really glad that's the first question that you put to me, Tash. It struck me that I have to center Black women and women of color because as a woman who was born in Egypt and as a woman of Muslim descent and as a woman who moved to the US in the year 2000, so it's been 20 years now, and as a feminist, I've been a feminist, since my teenage years, I realized that for so many white feminists, the fight is misogyny and sexism. The fight is the fight that is against any discrimination against them just for being women. But myself and so many others are not fighting the discrimination that we're subjected to just because we're women. Personally, I'm also fighting the patriarchy that targets my Muslim background, that targets the fact that I identify as queer, that targets the fact that I have lived in all of these different places and I identify in so many different forms, that targets the fact that I am a woman of color, that targets so many things, Arab, African, woman of color. So I don't have the luxury, as I call it, that white women have of fighting just misogyny. And also not just because I want to fight what targets me personally for my own personal identities, but because we have to recognize, as Kimberly Crenshaw, the law professor from California says, a Black feminist law professor, intersectionality is vital. And not just Kimberly Crenshaw, Audre Lorde, and so many other Black feminists have consistently stressed the fact that we have to see who is targeted the most and who are the most vulnerable, because when we fight the forms of discrimination and bigotries that they're subjected to, it uplifts everybody. So my feminism is not the kind of feminism that says, as long as my life is okay, I've achieved everything. I have destroyed the patriarchy. That's not how that works. So we now call that white feminism, neoliberal feminism, or liberal feminism. My feminism is I have to see beyond my own personal individual privilege to the other forms of discriminations and vulnerabilities that others are subjected to, and fight those. Because it's not about getting one woman in as a CEO and yay. It's not about individual liberation. It's about communal liberation. I am fighting for freedom for all, not just for my own freedom or just for freedom of women who are just like me. I want everyone to be free.
Absolutely. I think in Africa, we're still, okay, for me personally, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I think an aspect of patriarchy that you bring up, for me, that bothers me every day, remains in the classist system that we seem to have inherited and, you know, can't seem to shake off. I don't know how we're going to figure that out, but
Yes, it's so important.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in the United States, you know, especially when Bernie Sanders was still in the running, I know that he was a politician that appealed to many people across the world because he talked about many of the injustices that are endemic in the United States. But I think that one of the mistakes that many of his followers make, and I'm an anarchist. I'm an anarchist feminist. I'm not a socialist. And the reason that I'm not a socialist and the reason that I disagreed with some of Bernie Sanders' followers ties into the class aspect. Class is a horrendous form of oppression. It's one of those tentacles of the octopus, but it's one of several. And as that woman that I said, you know, with all the identities that I carry on my shoulders, I know that just eliminating class and just eliminating capitalism will not be enough to eliminate the patriarchy and its systems of oppressions. It's one of the many. So I think that as that anarchist, I often remind people, I am not interested in one group taking over from another so that we get rid of the bosses and the billionaires. Fuck the billionaires. Get rid of all of the billionaires and take all their money right now. But I'm not interested in replacing a system where the billionaires are in charge, where it's workers, just as workers in charge. Who are those workers? Are they white workers? Because where are the workers who are black? Where are the workers who are workers of color? Where are the workers who are women? Where are the workers who are disabled and queer, etc., etc.? So class, absolutely. In Egypt, I know class is a massive, massive issue. But I want us to focus on that octopus because class works in conjunction with so many other things. And as an anarchist feminist, I always read about the history of anarchist feminists who tell our comrades on the left, you know what, comrade? I'm in the revolution with you, but I'm here to remind you this revolution will fail unless this revolution also fights against sexism and homophobia and ableism and all the other forms of oppression.
Amazing. Thank you. I have another question from Indegwa Nguru. Concerning work, Black women or women of color have moved into diverse fields over the years, but they are facing an alarming and extensive occupational segregation regarding their lower wages. It's supposed to be continued and with limited mobility. How do we counter this from the ground up?
Right. Well, I think, and that's another great question, especially today when we're talking about work and various forms of labor during this global pandemic, because I think many issues that are really important are at play right now. And these are issues that we have to wrestle with now as we basically emerge through this global pandemic. And like I said at the beginning, we're not going back to normal. There is no going back. And I don't want normal, because normal is that system of oppressions that has made the upheaval around COVID-19 so much worse for so many people. And one of those issues that we have to think about and wrestle with is work and labor. Now, in the home or the domestic sphere is where so many women around the world have usually worked. And for a long time, what women did at home was not considered work. And to this day, it's still not considered work in the terms of work is something we do that we get paid for. Because women don't get a salary for working at home. A woman, ironically enough, would get a salary for doing the kind of work that she does at home if she goes and does it in another home. So if I were what we call a stay-at-home mother or a housewife, quote unquote, and I cook and I clean and I do everything in my house, I don't get a salary. But if I went and worked as a domestic worker or as a housekeeper in someone else's house, I would be paid. It's madness. So when we talk about women in work, we have to take that into consideration. We have to take that into consideration today as well, because so many people are working from home because it's not safe to go outside. So now that people are working from home, doing the same job at home that they did in the office, and they're being paid for it, we have to ask, why aren't women being paid for the work they've always done at home? Because that work is of value. So we have to, so the first thing we have to talk about when we talk about women and work is value, and ask whose work is valued. Now, I know in various parts, in various countries on our continent, and especially in the United States, whose work at home again is a central and vital question. This particularly affects what we call second wave feminism in the United States, where white women were fighting for the right to work, and black women have always worked in the United States. From the days when people were stolen from Africa and taken forcibly to what became the United States of America, black women have always worked. So this idea that women are fighting for the right to work, which women and which work? And this, we have to use that to complicate domestic work, especially on our continent, because I think of countries like Egypt and others. We bring little girls from the countryside and force them to engage in child labor in homes as domestic workers. There are women who endanger their lives from countries that are more impoverished than others to go to other places to become domestic workers and die and go back home dead, because no one cares about a domestic worker who's raped, who is subjected to violence. All of this, why? So she goes and takes care of a family thousands of miles away so that she can provide for her family back home. Again, during this global pandemic, we have to recognize that the majority of what we call the informal economy, again, look at the words that we use. This is all the economy. What is the economy? But what is known as the informal economy, 60% of this so-called informal economy is women. Women doing work that is very dangerous, that is very, very low paid, and they're the ones who are now losing their livelihood. So all of those things go into women and work, and this idea. So what is work? Who gets paid for this work? What work is valued enough to receive money for it? Where is work considered important? And who does the most dangerous and who does the most undervalued work? These are all really important questions for me as an anarchist, as a leftist, as a feminist revolutionary, and these must be really important questions for us as we emerge through this global pandemic, because this pandemic is affecting women more than anyone else, not just because of the violence that they're subjected to under quarantine from men, but also because women form the majority of healthcare workers are women, the majority of caregivers are women, and the majority of the so-called informal economy are women. And all of these women are being the most affected by this global pandemic.
Wow. I feel like I've been speaking. So, yeah, very true. I've got a question from Remy, but I think I'll double barrel it with one I want to ask. So I'm very curious to find out how the book was received in different markets. You know, I'm assuming different cultures or systems will receive it differently or reject it differently in different degrees.
Yes.
And then the second part to that question is, when you are harassed over your, you know, your beliefs, your anarchy, you know, how do you maintain your bravery? How do you maintain composure at times when this happens?
Right. Thank you for that, Tash. Well, you know, the book hasn't been published everywhere yet. It was launched in September in the US and Canada. And I've spoken at various festivals around the world. So last year I spoke in Nigeria at Ake. I spoke at Abantu in Soweto. And I went to other countries. I went to Manchester in the UK. I went to the Netherlands and various, it was also launched in Australia and New Zealand. And I spoke and I signed copies there as well at various festivals in Australia. So it hasn't gone all over the world. I think in September it's got another launch where other countries will get it. It will soon be out in French. It's been translated into French right now, and it's been translated into Chinese to be published in Taiwan. And I think we've also sold the rights in Turkish. It is my goal to have this book and my first book published in Arabic soon. Now, my first book, which I think it's been translated into 11 languages so far, We
Wow.
were unable to sell it to an Arabic language, to the Arabic language market. They're too scared to publish it. And even in English, my first book was banned in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Qatar, and I think that's in, so it's only available in Bahrain and in Oman in the Gulf, but it's banned in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE. So
Wow.
this then now as far as the current book in English is concerned, it has just to give you an idea of just how much it's disturbed people. When I went to Australia, I was on a TV show that was coinciding with a feminist festival where I went to speak. And the TV show has a live audience. It's a live TV show. And the audience asks questions of the panel. And the panel were all feminists. It was 5 cis women and 1 non-binary person. And the non-binary person was an indigenous person, a First Nations person in that country. And before I even arrived in Australia, the men's rights activists, the misogynist shits, were ready for me because they knew from interviews I'd given in the US and in Canada about this chapter that I read from, about violence. So they were already preparing for Mona. And they were already like, Mona's inciting violence. Mona wants us to kill men. So I got asked a question during the show about violence and about that chapter. And of course, the question was prefaced with, don't you think violence begets violence? As if I have invented violence and there's never been violence until Mona wrote her book in September 2019. So centuries of male violence against us, they beget what? I don't know. I don't know what they beget. So I answered in the same way that I answer in the book. I said, how long must we wait for boys and men to stop beating and murdering us? This is really now, this is the crux of it now. How many rapists must we kill before men stop raping us? Because I said this, and because I said fuck 10 times, my favorite F word, and because of a comment by the non-binary indigenous person in which they said, you know what, indigenous people in this country have been so patient, well, maybe it's time to burn shit down. Because of this, a TV show was banned. This episode of the TV show was banned in Australia, a so-called democracy, in the year 2019. Because I asked a question, how many rapists must we kill before men stop raping women? And I stressed on the show, I said, all of this reaction is because I ask you to imagine violence against men. I'm not saying go out there and kill them. I'm asking you to imagine. And imaginary violence against men upsets people more than the actual daily violence against women, girls, children, and queer people. It's incredible. So this is in the countries that are so-called democracies. These are the countries that lecture other parts of the world. Why are you treating women like this? And you know, one of the ironies of this TV episode being banned is that I am a woman of Muslim descent. I am a woman of color from Egypt. And I did not appear on Australian television to go on and on and on about Muslim men are so violent. I wrote a whole book about that in my first book. I went on Australian TV to say men are violent, to ask how many rapists must we kill? And because how dare this brown woman of Muslim descent come to our country, the white people, come to our country and lecture us about violence. So it was a good exercise in asking how many white men have to be upset before a TV episode gets banned. And the answer is about 400. That's it. In a fucking democracy in 2019. So that's how my book was received, Tash. I'm very proud.
You are very brave as well.
Oh, you asked me, how do I continue? Honestly, you know what? Look, I'm 52. I will be 53 this summer. So I've had years of practice. The Egyptian riot police broke my arms and sexually assaulted me. I was detained and blindfolded. All of this is all practice for this. If I had advice for younger Mona, is that I will tell her, your skin will thicken. Your skin will become as thick and powerful as like titanium, because patriarchy needs you to have really thick skin, because you need to wake up every day and say, fuck you, patriarchy. I am here to destroy you. That's what I'm here for. I don't waste my time with fools. I rarely get into arguments on Twitter anymore. I just say, fuck off, kitten, because I've got work to do.
So when did you realize that this was your calling? When were you, when did you have that conviction that this is what you were put here to do?
Well, so I was born in Egypt, and when I was 7, my family moved to London, and we lived there for almost 8 years. And then when I was 15, we moved to Saudi Arabia. And really, honestly, that was a before and after moment. Because I often say, moving to Saudi Arabia traumatized me. I use that word intentionally, traumatized me into feminism. So around the age of 15, 16, I was like, fuck this shit. There's something wrong with this world. And so that's where feminism came to me. It was saved my mind and saved my heart. So that was a before and after moment. And I decided when I was in Saudi Arabia, when I was about 16, that I would become a journalist, because journalism for me was freedom. So I moved back to Egypt. I became a journalist, but I was a news reporter. I wrote about everything, but mostly I focused on the human rights violations of the Mubarak regime. And I would write about feminism. But I think a more recent kind of this is my core. So I've been a feminist since I was 15, 16. But a more recent, you know what, fuck everything else. This is it. I am here to destroy you, patriarchy. This feeling has been building up. But honestly, Tash, I think a real kind of before and after moment kind of line drawn was in November of 2011, when Egyptian riot police beat me, broke both my arms, sexually assaulted me, and I was detained for 12 hours by the police for 6, and by military intelligence for another 6 hours. They blindfolded me and they interrogated me. I was detained at a protest near Tahrir Square. So it was during the year of the revolution, but not during the 18 days. When that happened, and I was finally released, and I'm talking about this very, very quickly because I've written about this, and I've talked about it before, but I'm more interested now in what that did to me rather than what happened to me at that time. I spent 3 months with my arms in casts, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? Because I'm a writer and I write, and I couldn't use my fingers because both of my arms were in casts. So I decided that my body would become my way of communicating with the world. And I promised myself I would dye my hair red and get tattoos on both of my arms as a gift to myself for surviving. And this red hair says, fuck you, you didn't kill me, I survived. So I began to use my body to communicate, to say, fuck you, I survived, and I've got my tattoos and everything. And that, the understanding that I survived something terrible was also underpinned with the understanding that if I were not Mona, if I were not who I was, which is famous, someone everyone knows, a woman who has a lot of privilege, and a woman who has a massive platform, if I didn't have all of these privileges, I would have died. So that moment became my truly fuck this shit moment. Because not only do I now move through the world going, fuck you, I survived, you didn't kill me, but it's like it liberated me from so much. And that's my point here, is that the liberation process, the personal liberation process, is a long one. But this one was a massive jolt of liberation, because I was like, you know what? This is what Audre Lorde talked about. Audre Lorde, the Black lesbian poet and revolutionary, said your silence will not protect you. So I sat there and I thought, you know what? I could have died. What are all the things I have not said that would have gone unsaid if they had killed me? So that was a massive before and after moment. And that was when this is my mission, patriarchy. I'm looking in your eye. Fuck you. I'm going to destroy you. That was it, Tash.
Wow. That is profound, Mona. That is profound and brave again, as I said. We've got a question here that says, you've mentioned before your fascination with the Spanish Civil War and women fighting during that time. Do you see a possibility for their vision of the world post COVID-19?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad whoever asked that question. Who asked that question?
Maza Mengistu.
Maza, I love you, my sister, my comrade. Yes, I definitely do. Because I just finished reading a book about anarchist feminist women during the Spanish Revolution and Civil War. And the organization was called Mujeres Libres, which means free women. And what they did and their vision is exactly the vision that I hold on to. And it is a vision that says, we want, and I want, liberation from all forms of hierarchies, all forms of authority, and all forms of power. And that's why I'm an anarchist and not a socialist. And these women recognized, as I recognized during the Egyptian revolution, and so many of us recognized during so many revolutions, that revolutions too often, everyone is called to join the revolution, and then we realize that the revolution is actually a cisgender penis swinging contest. It's one group of cisgender penises against another group of cisgender penises. We see this all across our beloved continent. South Africa, Zimbabwe, so Egypt, so many countries across our continent that had liberation movements in which so many joined, ended up being one group of men fighting another group of men. Who is the revolution for? Yeah. I asked this when I went to Abantu. Abantu is an incredible radical revolutionary place. And I asked when I gave the keynote there, who is the revolution for? And the revolution ends up being for one group of cis penises against another group. And I don't want that. That is not my revolution. So what these women, the anarchist women in Spain did was they told their fellow anarchist men, you know what, we're anarchists too, but we recognize that you're misogynist shits. And we're going to have our own organization that fights for anarchism, yes, but also has feminism and the emancipation of women at its heart. Because any revolution that does not have the destruction of patriarchy as a core demand is a revolution that will fail. And this has been across the world. So I am reading now so many anarchists from different parts of the world, from different times, because I am working on my manifesto of liberation. Anarchist, feminist, revolutionary liberation for post-COVID, because I'm preparing for that world. And that world has to be the world that we were told was impossible. Impossible, why? So that's what I'm doing. I am going to use my anarchist, feminist, revolutionary manifesto to destroy you, patriarchy.
Yeah, no more waiting, man. No more waiting. It's done. It's done. I've got a question from Frankie. He asks, he says, Mona, you've encountered physical violence, you know, doing your journalism and activism. How did you use the broken bones as fuel for your writing? And do you see a time when white women become allies?
Right. Those are two very good questions. Thank you, my brother and comrade, Frankie. Okay, Chike. So my broken bones, I used right after, so when I was finally released from police and military custody in Cairo in November 2019, I went to a hospital and they discovered my fractures and both my arms were put in casts. What I immediately did was I accepted interviews from media from around the world because I understood the power, again, my body now as that mode of communication. I understood the power of going on televisions around the world, CNN Live, the BBC Live, every different language you can imagine live, holding up my broken bones and saying, this is what the fascist Egyptian military junta did to me through their police force. Imagine what they do to women who are not Eltahawy. They did this to me knowing that I'm famous, knowing that people will find out what happened to me. The Guardian reported, Al Jazeera reported, the State Department wrote to me. So they did all of this knowing that the world would find out. And I wanted the world to see what they did to me, but to also remind the world that there are anonymous, invisible, working class women who are being subjected to even worse. So my immediate thing to do was to expose what they did, to call out what they did, and to say, stop supporting these fascist fucks. The United States has supported Egyptian regimes for decades. So that's what I did immediately. And then I wrote about it a lot, and I spoke about it in public lectures and all of that. But I think if I want to talk very quickly about what I personally did about my broken bones, other than my fuck you, I survived red hair. And that it was one of the inspirations for my new book. And that was when I went to a club with my beloved in Montreal, Canada, and we were dancing, and I was sexually assaulted as we were dancing, and I found the man who sexually assaulted me, and I beat the fuck out of him. And that was, now, so many of us have been sexually assaulted, groped, sexually assaulted, so many things. Now, I was sexually assaulted when the Egyptian police attacked me in 2011, but sometimes we can't fight back. I had a chance then to fight back, and I got this guy. I sat on him and I punched and I punched and I punched, and it was fucking glorious. And I took all of that, and I took all of that rage and everything that has ever happened to me, not just what he did to me, but what the Egyptian police did to me when I was, and all the assaults I've ever gone through. And I wrote that chapter on violence, fueled by all of this, because I want to know why women are not taught to fight physically.
Yeah.
We're constantly
True.
told, you know, violence will just beget violence. Don't sink to their level. Fuck sinking to their level. If sinking to their level gets them to stop fucking killing us, I will sink even lower. Because the reason that men feel so confident in attacking women, children, and queer people is because they know that patriarchy and its laws and its culture and its police is going to protect them and is going to hurt us for fighting back. We're not even allowed to fight back. So I used everything that happened to me personally to expose patriarchal violence from the regime, but also to expose generally how patriarchy basically holds my hands behind my back and says, you have to take it. And then you have to wait until men suddenly decide to be decent and stop assaulting you. Fuck that shit and fuck decent. I am not a decent person. I'm a very vulgar and profane person because patriarchy is more vulgar and more profane. The violence of patriarchy is the true vulgarity and the true profanity. White women, are they ever going to be allies? Honestly, frankly, I don't give a fuck. I have so many things to fight. I don't need white women. I want to be part of a global anarchist feminist army, revolutionary army. If white women are going to sit there and just count their own blessings and say, I have everything I need, I don't need that. I don't need that. I am marching forward with my anarchist feminist revolution. Whoever wants to join, welcome. I am not waiting for white women.
No more waiting. So, Mona, Alex Obi is asking, what are the ways to fight the state? Since we're talking about learning to fight, you know, how can we fight the state?
Well, the state is obviously one of the things that I fight against as an anarchist, because I think that the state right now has shown us around the world its failure. In every country imaginable, most countries have failed during this global pandemic. I think of the United States, my country of citizenship, along with Egypt. This is the wealthiest country in the history of humanity. It has failed. New York City, where I've lived since 2002, is the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the world. And look how it's failed people. But who has it failed, we have to ask. It has failed Black people, it has failed brown people, it has failed people of color, and it has failed the poor. Now, if you take all of those and take it to other countries where it's not white people, but it would be in place of white people in Egypt, I would put rich people, because who's suffering the most from COVID-19 in Egypt right now? It will be the poor, it will be the working class, it will be the queer, it will be the women, all of this. So the state, we have to recognize at this moment that the state has failed us and continues to fail us. And the state counts on our acquiescence and our belief that the state works to our benefit.
Mona, I'm so...
Yes?
I'm so sorry to disturb you, but it's going to switch us off just now because we've done our full hour. So if it does,
okay.
Yeah, it didn't feel like that. It's been amazing. If it does, before you switch off, please save the video.
I will save
but
it.
We're
yes.
still talking, so I take it we're still on. So sorry to have cut you short, just in case.
No worries. Thank you for reminding me. It says here that I have 1 minute and 56 seconds remaining, so I will wrap up very quickly. So we have to basically let the state know that we have a collective power that we will use against it. Obviously, we can't protest on the streets right now, but we can protest online. But it's not just through protests that we can let the state know that we have a collective power. We are seeing mutual aid and direct action in process now. Various communities are helping each other, whether by delivering food to those who can't go out, whether by collecting money for those who are being hurt the most, whether by making masks. When we look around and we recognize our power to take care of each other.
Sorry, Mona, everyone saying please save it. Sorry, everyone says please save it. It may cut, and if it does, we'll lose all of this.
Should I save it now? Okay, I will save it now. I'm going to end now and save it, okay?
But thank you. Thank you so much.
Hold on. Nope, I do not want to end this. Okay, I need to save this, and it's not letting me save it. I don't know why.
It should give you an option to save.
Do I press end and then press save?
Is that the only option it's giving you?
Yeah, it says either delete or cancel.
Whoa, it shouldn't. It should ask you if you want to save it.
Are you sure you want to end your live video? Okay, if I say end now, I'm really worried. Okay, I'm going to end it now.
Okay, so just don't hit delete, yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Does
I
it ask
pressed,
you to save to stories?
yeah, but is it after end now?
Uh, End it and then save to story.
Okay.